Welcome, curious minds, to Spotlight Chronicles. Picture this, a world where, every movie looks pretty much the same, slick, studio polished, perfectly framed, that whole classic Hollywood thing.
Yeah, exactly. Then out of seemingly nowhere, you get this bunch of audacious filmmakers in France. They grab handheld cameras, they're shooting in natural light, and they just tear up the rule book.
Yeah.
That right there, that's the French New Wave.
And it immediately sparks these questions.
Was it truly revolutionary, or was it just disruptive for disruption's sake? Did it democratize filmmaking, make it accessible, or did it just end up alienating audiences? That's really what we want to get into today.
Absolutely. So our mission on this deep dive is to unpack the French New Wave, look at its global ripples, from Godard's jump cuts, those really jarring edits that just shatter smooth continuity.
Yeah, totally jarring.
To Truffaut's incredibly raw storytelling, we're asking, okay, how did this movement really change cinema? And, was that change ultimately for the better or for worse? This one feels like it's going to be a fascinating ride.
Oh, definitely. It forces you to grapple with some really fundamental questions about what art even is, and maybe more importantly, who gets to make it.
Okay, so let's dig into the foundations then. Those iconic handheld cameras and that use of natural light, they basically became the visual signature. I'm thinking about those Eclair cameras, the ones designed for newsreels. They were definitely cheaper, lighter than the huge studio rigs. So was picking them up like a bold artistic choice, or was it more, just practical, a way around the cost and limitations of the studio system?
Well, that's what's so interesting. It's kind of both, and maybe neither, if you look at it simply.
Right.
Those budget issues, they weren't just obstacles. They actually became the crucible where this new visual style got forged.
Yeah.
Necessity really did push them to innovate. They didn't just, accept the limitations. They grabbed them, turned them into strengths. It forced them to capture life in a way that studio perfection just couldn't.
Okay, but here's where I hesitate a bit. When you watch some of those early films, some of that shaky camera work,
Yeah.
it sometimes feels less like a deliberate style and more like, kind of amateurish. I don't mean that harshly, but you put it next to, say, a Hitchcock film from the same time.
But comparing Hitchcock to Godard, that's like comparing, a perfectly tuned symphony orchestra to a raw jazz improv session.
Okay.
Hitchcock was all about absolute control, meticulous, calculated perfection, the new wave. That was about capturing life as it happened, raw, immediate, unfiltered. That shakiness you're seeing, that wasn't just clumsiness, it was intentional immediacy. It was aiming for a different kind of authenticity.
But then, okay, if it was this pure artistic thing, why were the box office numbers often so, bad back then? Audiences weren't exactly lining up, right? They often pulled in way less than a standard Hollywood picture. Doesn't that suggest the style might have pushed away as many people it could pulled in?
Are we really measuring artistic value by opening weekend grosses? I mean, by that logic, some of the greatest works ever would be considered failures.
Well, no, but...
Sure, maybe the initial mainstream crowds were baffled. But fast forward a few decades, those exact same films are fundamental texts in every film school on the planet. That's not just a coincidence. That is serious, lasting impact.
I just think maybe we shouldn't romanticize every single aspect. Like the natural lighting, it gives this incredible, gorgeous realism sometimes. But let's be real, it was also because they couldn't afford huge studio lighting setups.
And yet, that gorgeous realism you just mentioned became a core part of their visual identity. Isn't that the absolute definition of innovation? Taking those constraints and turning them into something revolutionary, something new.
Or is it just, cleverly rebranding limitations as genius? Because this is where I get a bit stuck. If a film student today shoots something shaky and poorly lit, we might just call it a rough cut, needs work. But Godard does it in 1960, and suddenly it's art with a capital A. It reminds me of, the first time I tried shooting video on my phone. Yeah, it's raw, but is it intentionally raw or just the best I could manage?
Yeah, you've really hit on something important there. And this is maybe where our perspectives diverge a bit. You seem focused on the how, the technical execution.
Yeah, maybe.
And I'm really trying to focus on the why. The technique itself isn't the only thing that matters. It's the intent behind it. The new wave wasn't just breaking rules because they could. They were fundamentally asking, what if cinema could actually feel alive? What if it could capture the messy, spontaneous, unpredictable feel of real life instead of just showing us a perfectly constructed story?
Okay, that's actually a really good way to put it. I still think there's a line somewhere between intentional rawness and just, rough edges. But I definitely see your point. Maybe it is less about the tools themselves and more about what they were trying to say with those tools.
Precisely. And that's why this whole discussion is so crucial. It's not just about cameras. It's about whether art has to be polished to be legitimate or if the messiness itself can be part of its truth.
Thinking about it like that actually makes me reconsider my initial reaction. Maybe I have been too hung up on the technical stuff and not enough on the spirit driving it. All right, now you're just showing off. But speaking of daring choices, these ideas really came to life in two absolute landmark films, Godard's Breathless and Truffaut's The 400 Blows. They're both like the poster children for the movement, right? But for me, they feel so incredibly different in how they land.
And that's exactly where it gets fast. Because for me, they're like two sides of the exact same revolutionary coin. Both are smashing rules, just in completely different but equally powerful ways.
My hangup, I guess, is with Breathless. Those jump cuts, the pacing feels so disjointed. It almost seems like it's mocking traditional storytelling. Is that really bold innovation or is it just messy?
Hold on, messy. You're calling it messy, but that's the entire point. Godard is deliberately playing with time, with what you expect as an audience member. It's not about seamless flow. It's about capturing the chaos, the impulsiveness of life of the character. You can't just slap the label messy on it because it doesn't follow the Hollywood playbook.
Okay, but you could argue that when Breathless first came out in 1960, people were genuinely baffled. Like we said, the box office wasn't great compared to typical films then. Doesn't that suggest it felt more alienating than groundbreaking to a lot of people at the time?
Again, are we using opening weekend ticket sales as our main measure of artistic importance? Maybe mainstream audiences struggled at first, yeah. But critics, even the ones who were confused by it, they knew they were seeing something completely new, unprecedented. That right there, that's the sign of something truly revolutionary.
Fair enough. But then you look at The 400 Blows. Truffaut's film also breaks rules, but it's grounded in this really deep emotional realism, almost poetic. Audiences connected with that film much more easily, didn't they? Doesn't that show you can innovate in a big way without completely pushing the audience away?
Or does it just suggest that Truffaut's style was, easier to swallow initially? Let's be honest. The 400 Blows is still way more linear in its narrative than Breathless. It's revolutionary in its emotional honesty, absolutely, but it's not taking a sledgehammer to the formal rulebook in quite the same aggressive way.
So are you saying Truffaut wasn't radical enough now? That feels like you're kind of shifting the argument a bit.
Not at all. I'm just saying they were radical in different but equally vital ways. The 400 Blows gives us this raw, unfiltered look at childhood that's emotionally revolutionary. Breathless is formally revolutionary. It fundamentally changed the language of cinema, how films could be put together. Both are critical, but they're exploring different paths for what cinema could be.
Okay, that distinction makes sense. But if you look today at retrospectives, critical polls, whatever, The 400 Blows nearly always ranks higher as one of the greatest films. Doesn't that suggest Truffaut's approach just aged better? Proved more timeless?
Or does it just mean his style is easier for people to embrace? Popularity isn't always the same thing as groundbreaking significance. Breathless literally changed how movies could be edited, how they could be conceived. You just can't separate its massive influence from how challenging it might have felt at first.
But influence isn't always the same as quality, is it? You can acknowledge a film changed things and still find it, I don't know, a little self-indulgent.
Whoa, self-indulgent. That's a pretty strong word. Are you saying Godard was just showing off with those techniques?
Maybe. A little. The jump cuts, they feel flashy. But do they really serve the story? Or are they just there to kind of yell, hey, look how clever I am?
I think that view is maybe a misreading. Those jump cuts aren't just flash for flash's sake. They're meant to be disorienting. They're designed to put you right inside the restless, impulsive head of the character, Michelle. That's not showing off. That is storytelling, just in a very specific, unconventional way.
Huh. Okay, I hadn't really thought of it quite like that. But even if I accept that, doesn't The 400 Blows achieve something similar, putting you in Antoine's head, but maybe with more emotional punch? Antoine's story just hits harder because it's not just stylish. It feels deeply soulful.
Absolutely it does. But that's like comparing, a direct punch to the gut with a kind of subtle knife twist to the heart. Both affect you deeply, just in different ways. Godard was going for that cool, detached feeling because that's part of Michel's character.
Yeah.
Truffaut filled his film with warmth and vulnerability. Neither way is inherently better. They're just different tools for different artistic goals.
Okay, that's actually a really strong point. Maybe I have been too strict judging them by the same yardstick when their actual aims were pretty different.
Exactly. And that's what makes the whole New Wave thing so endlessly fascinating. It wasn't just one thing. You had Godard taking cinema apart, Truffaut making it more human, Agnes Varda completely redefining it, all happening under this one big, messy banner.
So you're saying the movement's real strength was just how diverse the approaches were within it?
Precisely. It's not about choosing sides, Breathless versus 400 Blows. It's about seeing, celebrating that both could exist at the same time, and that, wow, they're still getting us arguing like this 60 years later.
Well, yeah, when you put it like that, the question isn't really which film is better, but more like what does each one show us about how wide-ranging cinema can actually be?
Now you're getting it. Although, personally, I still think Breathless is just a touch cooler.
Of course you do. All right, let me toss out a really provocative what if then. What if Hollywood, back in the 60s, had just fully embraced the new wave rules? Like, totally. Imagine every blockbuster today had jump cuts, natural lighting, fragmented stories. Would cinema be, like, richer for it or just completely unwatchable for most people?
Ooh, wow. That is a really interesting thought experiment. Can you imagine? A Marvel movie, but edited like Godard. Iron Man having existential monologues with shaky cam. That sounds weirdly compelling.
Compelling, maybe, or just totally incoherent for a mass audience. Because look, I admire the new wave's influence on indie film, for sure, but if every single big studio movie operated like that, wouldn't it just completely alienate people? You can't really build, like, global mega franchises on ambiguity and deconstruction, can you?
But maybe that's the point. Maybe franchises, as we currently understand them, are actually the problem. What if Hollywood had looked at the new wave and seen it as this profound challenge to completely rethink what a blockbuster could even be? Less rigid formula, way more creative risk-taking. Can you imagine a world where, like, Top Gun had handheld dogfights and genuinely improvised dialogue?
Okay, maybe, but let's be realistic here. Most people go to the movies for escapism, right? Not necessarily to sit and ponder the meaninglessness of existence while eating popcorn. The new wave worked as a niche thing. If you tried to scale that up to mass production, I think you'd just have a lot of confused people.
Or maybe you'd cultivate smarter, more engaged audiences over time. Think about it. If studios had consistently backed real experimentation instead of always playing it safe with predictable formulas, wouldn't we as viewers just be more accustomed to challenging stories by now? The new wave, even with its limited commercial success, kind of proved audiences could handle complexity.
Capable of handling is one thing, though. Eagerly consuming it en masse is something else entirely. Like you said, those films were cult hits, not blockbusters. Hollywood's main job, for better or worse, has always been about entertaining the widest possible audience, not just film nerds.
But that feels like such a narrow way to define entertainment. The new wave was entertaining, just in a different, more thought-provoking way. It's like saying music should only ever be catchy pop hits.
Right.
What if cinema had evolved to value genuine surprise over just comforting familiarity?
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, maybe that predictability is what's actually holding the art form back now.
Look, I'm not saying familiarity is everything, but there's a reason basic narrative structure exists, right? Even someone like Scorsese, who clearly loves the new wave, still tells incredibly cohesive stories. It's really hard to build real emotional payoff with completely random jump cuts or a plot that's totally fragmented.
Random. Those jump cuts in Breathless are anything but random. They're deliberate, they have a rhythm, it's almost like visual jazz. And Scorsese is actually a perfect example. He brilliantly took that raw energy from the new waves and fused it with classic storytelling. What if Hollywood had chased that kind of fusion more often, instead of just sticking to rigid templates?
My worry is that for every potential Scorsese, you'd get 100 other filmmakers just misusing those techniques. If every studio director suddenly had free rein to deconstruct narratives, we'd probably just drown in pretentious, incoherent messes.
Or maybe we might have seen way more diverse and original voices actually break through. The new wave did dramatically democratize filmmaking, right? It basically said, hey, you don't need a giant budget or studio approval to make something important. What if Hollywood had truly embraced that idea instead of mostly keeping the gates closed?
But that's the tension, isn't it? Democracy can sometimes lead to chaos. I'm not against artistic freedom, obviously, but without some kind of basic guardrails, you risk losing that shared language that makes cinema feel like a communal thing. Not every experiment belongs in a multiplex.
And who gets to decide what belongs? Why should play it safe always be the default setting? The new wave bravely showed that rules are there to be broken. If Hollywood had really internalized that lesson, maybe we wouldn't be talking about superhero fatigue right now.
Or we'd have superhero movies nobody could follow. Look, I'm all for innovation, but surely there's a middle ground. The new wave's most important legacy, I think, is where it influenced things without completely taking over. Total adoption probably would have just been overkill.
It might have stopped Hollywood from becoming what some people argue it is, now just a content factory. Imagine a world where art and popular entertainment weren't always treated like they're totally separate, opposing forces. That, maybe, is the real missed opportunity here.
I still think mass audiences need anchors, familiar structures to hold on to, but you're definitely right that the divide didn't have to become so stark. Maybe the ideal cinema world is one where new wave ideas are seen as powerful tools in the toolkit, not like rigid instructions.
Exactly. It's not about completely erasing Hollywood's DNA, but about letting it evolve more dynamically. The tragedy isn't that the new wave failed or anything. It's that Hollywood often just borrowed the cool surface tricks, the look, without really absorbing its genuinely disruptive spirit.
Okay, that I can completely get behind. So maybe the real question isn't what if Hollywood went full new wave, but more like what if Hollywood had actually taken its lessons more seriously?
Precisely. We might have ended up with blockbusters that had both brains and box office clout.
Wow. Okay, I came into this hypothetical ready to argue against it, but you've actually convinced me it's less about these extremes and more about a really significant potential that was kind of missed.
Welcome to the gray zone. It's where all the truly interesting historical chats happen.
So, okay, here's something that's bugging me now. When people say TikTok creators are the new Goddards, I don't quite buy it. I mean, yeah, okay, they're both using cheap cameras, breaking rules. But is a 15-second dance trend really the same thing as Breathless?
Well, you're comparing apples and digital apples there, aren't you? It's not about the content being identical, not in form or, ambition. It's really about the spirit. Anyone can grab a phone and make something now, just like anyone back then could grab an Eclair camera. That fundamental accessibility, that spirit of just doing it, disrupting things, that feels like a direct line to me.
But the new wave wasn't just about access. It was steeped in intentionality, right? Goddard didn't just accidentally stumble on jump cuts. They were a very deliberate choice. Whereas so much of TikTok feels like it's driven by algorithms, by trends. Where's the auteur in that? That single guiding artistic vision we usually associate with the director.
That feels like a pretty narrow definition of creativity today, though. Just because someone's riffing on a trending sound or format doesn't mean they aren't making deliberate, authored choices within those limitations. This brings up a really interesting question.
Yeah.
Isn't that its own kind of authorship, learning to speak the language of a new medium? Have you seen creators like Cabone Lame? He says more was just a look than some films manage in 2 hours.
Okay, I'll grant you authorship doesn't always look the same.
Right.
But artistry. The new wave felt like it was trying to push cinema forward as an art form, expand what it could do. What's TikTok pushing? More efficient ways to sell stuff and...
Ouch. That sounds a bit dismissive of a whole platform, doesn't it? What if the new wave guys had social media? Imagine Godard posting little jump cut manifestos on Instagram or something. The tools are totally different, but that core impulse to disrupt, to experiment, to get around the usual gatekeepers feels very much the same.
But that's kind of my point. The new wave disrupted to, arguably, elevate film, expand its possibilities. Social media, a lot of the time, feels like it disrupts just to keep you scrolling. One seems aimed at expanding art. The other often feels like it's accidentally shrinking our attention spans.
Maybe it's about meeting people right where they are. Not everyone's going to sit through a 3-hour Ingmar Bergman film, let's be honest. But they might totally engage with complex ideas or real artistry if it's delivered in 60 seconds. Isn't that democratization actually happening, letting more people connect with creative stuff?
If democratization means sort of flattening everything into easily digestible content, then maybe. The new wave gave us true thought. TikTok gives sea shanty remixes on loop.
You're picking the easy targets there. For every throwaway dance trend or, yes, sea shanty, there's someone brilliantly using short video to teach complex film theory or tell really moving personal stories. The format itself is neutral, right? It's about what creators do with it. And isn't that exactly what the new wave argued about their cheap little cameras?
I hadn't really considered the educational angle as much, but even then, isn't the algorithm the massive elephant in the room? The new wave was fundamentally anti-establishment. TikTok creators are mostly just trying to figure out an algorithm designed by a giant corporation. How is that rebellious?
That's a fair point, absolutely. But maybe rebellion just looks different now in the digital age. Finding ways to subvert the algorithm, clever ways to get your unique voice heard despite its constraints. Maybe that is the new punk rock. Have you seen creators who cleverly hijack trending sounds to make sharp political points? That feels pretty Godard-level subversive to me, just using hashtags instead of jump cuts.
I suppose. But it still feels like comparing a surgeon's scalpel to maybe a blunt instrument. The new wave's techniques, even when raw, felt precise somehow. Viral content often just feels like a shotgun blast, throw enough out there and hope something hits.
Or maybe precision is overrated sometimes. The new wave itself embraced happy accident. The shaky camera, the actors improvising dialogue, TikTok's embrace of spontaneity, and yeah, even randomness sometimes isn't actually that far removed. Both are trying to capture something raw, unpolished.
Okay, but here's where I push back again. The new wave's rawness felt ultimately curated. Like, every frame in the 400 blows feels deliberate, even when it seems spontaneous. TikTok's rawness often feels genuinely unfiltered, without much editorial shaping. And that, to me, often feels less like art and more like just noise.
Unless the noise is the art sometimes. Look, I'm not saying every single TikTok video is high art, obviously. But then again, neither was every single film made during the New Wave era. The movement's legacy is built on the standouts, right? The Godards, the Vardas. Why shouldn't we judge digital creators by their best, most impactful work, too?
Because the system itself, the algorithm, often seems designed against breakthrough work now. It rewards consistency, stuff that's easily replicable, not necessarily bold innovation. The new wave directors could fail spectacularly and still get another chance. Try failing spectacularly on YouTube today. Your stuff just vanishes into the digital ether.
Now that is a really powerful point. The immense pressure to constantly feed the machine, it absolutely warps creativity. But doesn't that make the creators who actively push against that pressure, who resist it, even more like the original new wave pioneers, the ones who stubbornly put their artistic vision ahead of just chasing views?
I guess so, but they feel like the exceptions, not the rule. The new wave, at its core, felt like a movement made up of exceptions. That feels like the key difference. It was a collective wave, not just a few rebels swimming against a corporate tide.
Maybe every big shift starts with just a handful of rebels.
Yeah.
What if we're just too close to it right now to really see the digital new wave that might be forming? Maybe 20 years from now, we'll look back at certain creators and say, yeah, they were the Godards of their time.
Huh. That's actually a really compelling thought. Maybe I have been judging TikTok by its average output instead of looking at its potential vanguard.
Exactly. The new wave wasn't every single French filmmaker who picked up a camera. It was the ones who dared to do something different. Why wouldn't the same idea apply to creators online today?
Okay, but here's my last hang up on this. The new wave had cafes, right? Salons, actual physical places where they argued, debated, collaborated intensely. Digital creators are often just working alone in their rooms. Doesn't that lack of collective physical energy just fundamentally change the whole dynamic?
Or does it just mean the salon has moved online? To Discord servers, to Patreon communities, to comment sections, that collaborative spirit, the intellectual back and forth, the sense of community, it's absolutely still there for many creators. It's just virtual now.
Yeah.
And in some ways, isn't that even more democratic? No physical gatekeepers, no need to be in Paris.
Wow. Okay. I came into this segment pretty much ready to dismiss TikTok as just a shallow imitation, but you've genuinely made me rethink that. Maybe it really is less about a direct, literal comparison and more about seeing how that spirit of rebellion and artistic disruption just adapts to whatever new tools and spaces become available.
Exactly. The spirit feels the same. Democratize, disrupt, dare. The camera just got way smaller, and the potential audience got massively, exponentially larger, which is either, terrifying or incredibly thrilling, maybe both. Just like the new wave itself probably felt back in 1960. History doesn't repeat itself, maybe, but it definitely seems to rhyme.
After all this back and forth, what really stays with me is just how wonderfully slippery the new wave's legacy actually is. One clean thing, it was this really potent mix of rebellion and, maybe some pretension of incredible freedom and also undeniable exclusion, all happening at the same time.
Absolutely. And maybe that's exactly why it still fascinates us so much all these decades later. It doesn't offer a neat, tidy lesson you can just memorize. It's this constant challenge. Every time you think you've got it pinned down, it sort of wriggles free, refuses to be put in a simple box.
Right. I came in kind of ready to push back against some of the hype, but you've consistently shown me both the brilliance and the cracks, and it's totally possible to admire its huge impact while also questioning the myths, the blind spots, and that itself feels like a powerful thing to realize, doesn't it? Great art doesn't have to be perfect to be incredibly important. The new wave's flaws are actually part of what makes it feel so human, just like those shaky cameras and sometimes messy scripts.
So where does that leave us? Maybe the real question isn't, was it revolutionary or was it overrated? But more like, how do we grapple with something that was so clearly, profoundly both? And that complex truth, that's not just about cinema, is it? It applies to pretty much every big movement, every major idea that shakes things up. They're hardly ever these perfect, unified things. They're the messy, vibrant result of people trying, failing, and sometimes, completely changing the game in the process.
Which means the conversation just keeps going. 60 years later, we're still asking what really counts as art, who gets the chance to create it, and whether rules are ultimately meant to be broken or just bent a little. And if that isn't the new wave's most lasting gift, just keeping us arguing, keeping us questioning, keeping us seeing things differently, then I honestly don't know what is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure. It's always fascinating to revisit.
See you next time on Spotlight Chronicles.